We're now going to move into the Q&A section of the event today, where you get to share your thoughts, your questions, and how it's going to run is we're actually going to have a few of the speakers on stage. And I'm going to be joined by Joel Richards. I'll just read a bit about him. So Joel Richards is from Sanctum Services. He's a neuroanthropologist specialising across fields of trauma, resilience, behaviour and cultural organisational systems, with nearly 20 years of practical experience working with youth, families and communities from multicultural, refugee and aboriginal backgrounds. Joel is with us in a private capacity today as the Managing Director of Sanctum Specialist Services, but he also works at Mirrabooka Family Support Network, which is also known as Mercy Care. So I will be running the mic around, but Joel is going to start off the questions for us. And I think we've got a mic for the panel. Do we have a mic for the panel? Okay, they can have my one.
Yeah.
All right, I'll just hand you the mic.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. How are we feeling? Inspired. Do we need to keep waking you up, or you're inspired? That's good. That's really good. Look, I'd like to thank you all for being here, and particularly would just like to acknowledge the regional viewers through live stream. They've sent in a couple of questions. What I'd like to do is just make sure that all of the tables and chairs are sort of, if we're getting around the tables and chairs, don't want to be able to trip over and have a hazard, so we want to be able to get out to you guys, okay? Now, the process is, if you wanted to ask a question, please state your name, where you're from or your role, and who you want to direct your question to. What I will do to warm up the thinking caps, though, is take a couple of questions that are sent through to the Questions at Sanctum Services email, and thank you, regional people, for doing so. So I'll start off with a couple of them, if that's okay with the panel, and then we'll see where we get. All right? All right. Bear with me. Okay. I thought we'd start with this one. So this is from Education in Broome. They haven't said whom. The behaviours of traumatised young people can often pose serious threat and harm to staff and other young people. How do you mitigate between ensuring safety within an environment while also tending to the traumagenic needs of the young person? And it's directed to Paul or all. So you can do an interpretive dance, Paul, if you want, or...
So I think that's a question that I know I'm given quite often, and I always say that we need to be looking at the overall functioning of the organizational system in itself. And if I look at where the whole concept of reimbursements came in my practice, it was being asked that question, how are we going to care for the young people that we are charged to look after every day? But we also need to understand that we're going to have to care for the staff at the same rate. What we found, I guess, over time is that when we have truly gotten down to looking at what the reimbursement needs really are, and we've moved away from trying to treat the diagnosis per se and really trying to meet the needs of the clients, that there's a better understanding for everyone. So when someone's standing in your face and they're yelling F you, or I'm gonna kill you, or I don't wanna be here, and I don't like this place, or whatever it is that they might be using as a behavior to get your attention, or to try to escape or to avoid something, the better knowledge that the staff have, the better they are to be able to use what we would call the thinking systems of their brain, and they're not reacting in a survival mode. It's a lot of ownership for staff. We work in a really tough situation a lot, and the tough situations will not stop. We will always have them for a little while, and our goal, I think one of the things that we always have to worry about is our desire to think that we have to cure everyone that comes into our presence. And really, in actuality, what we talk about a lot is that we may not be able to provide cures to people, but we can sure as hell make their lives a lot better. And by looking at our practices to do that. So how do we mitigate the safety? Well, I think it's by understanding the needs of the client, because I think oftentimes unsafe situations start to occur because we don't have a full grasp on what's going on. and we don't have a good idea about what their story is, what's behind it. A colleague of I know mine and Howard's, Nicholas Long, was the founder of the Life Space Crisis Intervention Institute, or LSCI, people may know him as that, has a phrase that has stuck with me forever and ever, and he said that nothing comes from nothing. And when you start to apply that to behavior, when there's a child in your face, there's a reason for that behavior. It's provided something in the past, and it's the reason they're doing it now. And so unless we stop and look beyond what the behavior is and to try to find the story and the connection, we will be finding ourselves in those situations where we're trying to mitigate safety. Here's the bottom line. We're also not foolish in the sense that we know that situations occur sometimes that we have to handle things in the present, and they are emergency procedures. We're not here to say that just if you start looking at reimbursements tomorrow, there won't be another emergency, there won't be another urgent situation. That's unrealistic and would be untrue. So I think it's about looking at your processes and putting plans in place. In my opinion, and I'll pass it along, would be it's really about turning to that needs focus rather than trying to attempt to do the other stuff that sometimes we fall trap to. So I'll pass it along. I don't know who else wants to contribute because they want others.
I'm happy to say a couple of things. I think do it differently. So all the stuff that Paul said, do it and work with it. But I think that there is a gap that we've noticed. So we have lots of different like care schools, behavioural schools, and when kids can't be there, it shouldn't be turned off. So something should be happening between then and so because typically there's almost a lot of frustration and anxiety built between the Department of Education and where the child lives, whether that's at home or the youth services or wherever else that is, based on the fact that there's a push to have that child sitting in a classroom at a certain time. So it comes back to relationships, and if there's strong relationships between the department and the people and the players, great things happen. We started our program of Learning Without Walls based on that program. We didn't want to replicate a school because there's already really good schools out there. The kids couldn't be there at the time, and we got that. So it was about attaching a teacher to them while they were not able to be at the school for various reasons, and it took the threat away from the school, where the school felt pushed to have and like, you know, and almost like that we experienced that we're sometimes risk assessed out of the school settings, where we took that away from that, saying let's work together. Like, you don't need to do that, we get it. So, but when can we come back? Because it's really important for that child to be a part of the school and to be a part of the community. We've got to start to look at our work 20, 30 years down the track, not to see that it's a program and it stops at a certain time.
Yeah, I can add from a barriers perspective, when you're asking young people, you know, what would you say some of the barriers are for you? When a young person says, just a particular case, I really don't want chandeliers to break around me. And then really getting interested in what does that actually even mean to the young person? And that to him related around trust. We had an incident where a young person looked like he happened to be under influence, and we're like, there is no way you're going ice skating with the rest of the group today. And that triggered trust being broken when he'd just been up all night. So really being mindful and understanding the young people that we're working through. We're like, what are some of their, I guess, barriers? And I guess that's what I specialise in looking at understanding what's actually in the way for a young person and getting in their world instead of coming from our own worlds. Yeah.
I'll just make a quick comment about that. I think sometimes people have embraced trauma-based approaches as the solution to all their problems. It just isn't. It's farcical, almost, what people are expecting of a particular framework. If we talk about co-regulation, we know that many kids who've experienced trauma, in fact, we know that one of the main things is that they struggle with managing their internal states, whether it's emotions or intrusive thoughts and that sort of thing. And we know that many behaviours are related to that. Problematic behaviours. We can talk about emotional flooding. Somebody, they just can't contain the anger or the frustration. But the problem is many behaviours aren't a result of emotional flooding. Some are to do with deliberate attempts to achieve a goal. They're instrumental. Or they might be just modelled on someone else's behaviour. If we use the same approaches all the time, we're just going to miss the mark. Assessment is critical. a sound assessment in the moment, but also of the young person overall. I was just thinking, in our child protection load in New South Wales, depending on what stats you read, about up to 60% of kids have diagnosed developmental issues. If that's the case, we need to be addressing them as well, assessing for them how they affect the behaviour as well. Trauma fits into that, but it is not the solution to all those problems.
Might even add that when situations occur, and I think we're all realistic enough in dealing with pretty high intensity clients I know from our agency, we will have emergency procedures that we'll have to put into place sometimes despite the reimbursements that we might be implementing. But the key also I think that's extremely important is that when an incident like that is concerning occurs, that caring people come back and study it. And if they fail to study it, they fail to learn from it and figure out how they can prevent it or keep it from happening in the future. So I think that becomes extremely important. It also adds value to the process of caring. So I think that would be one thing that I would add to that as well.
Thank you, guys. Another one from regional areas before we sort of open up to everyone here. This one is directed at Howard. It's a bit of a sizzler, Howard. It's related to the adverse childhood experience studies, for those that are aware. For those that aren't, I recommend Googling Folletti and Ander and having a look at that. The ACE studies imply that childhood trauma correlates strongly with domestic violence and potential for re-victimisation and or perpetration of violence in adulthood by both sexes. Why is this the case? And are current narratives and proposed solutions actually the most effective way to address these underlying issues? Bit of a loaded one.
It is very loaded and very complex, but can I just make a point about those studies, the ACE studies? We say studies now because there's about 60 published studies from that same data set, but there's also many replications all around the world of that sort of research. Folletti and Ander came up with 10 common adversities. There are many more than that. Being placed into care is not one of those 10, by the way, or a parent dying is not one of those 10. There are many, many other adversities that can affect someone. But the point I wanted to make is that if you look at those 10 adversities, they're not necessarily traumas as commonly understood. Many of them have to do with chronic stress, the cumulative impact of neglect. Does that make sense? In fact, that's the emphasis of Folletti and his group, of how it's to do with the cumulative amount of stress in a child's life, not necessarily the trauma per se. So I just wanted to sort of make that point. Domestic violence, of course, is one of those that often is experienced as trauma. I'm not quite sure that I can remember exactly what the question is, but we do know that the exposure to domestic violence and family violence is a very strong predictor of that person struggling themselves with controlling their behaviour and lashing out. It's not predictive in the sense that it's determined by those backgrounds, but the risk is definitely higher. If we look at the risk of incarceration, for instance, for domestic violence, there's a very strong correlation with that kid having experienced it. Again, it doesn't mean that it's determined, but just that the risk is there. Can I just suggest one of the mechanisms, of course, is this dysregulation mechanism. Yeah.
Thank you. At this point, just want to keep to time, I'll start opening it up on the floor. So if anyone's brave enough to raise their hand or has got a particular question, I'll come over to you. And we'll kind of share it between myself and Taku as far as the room, if that's okay, Taku?
Yes, that's fine. And I also just wanted to acknowledge that Dr. Cheryl has left for the day. So we do want to just thank her, and that's why she's not on stage. But if you have questions for her, please let any of the team know, or you can still send them through, I assume, to questions@sanctumservices.com if you have specific questions for her. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Fiona Evans. I'm actually a school nurse. Is there any other school nurses here? So I'm out for Metro, right. Dr. Paul, we work at the ground level with the children in care in the department, and we see them and we work with the families. The reimbursement education, this is the first I've heard about it. It's amazing. How can that be, shared with the likes of us who are very much at the ground level with these families? Because it's amazing. It gives us some really good strategies for the foster carers.
So let me make sure I have your question. How can you learn more about the...
Well, I'm the only school nurse here for the whole of Metro. There's a lot of us. How could we get that education that I've been lucky enough to get today?
Okay.
Is there a way of getting it?
We have this great training called the person brain model. Through the books probably would be a very, readily accessible way. We have the hopeful brain.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
Yeah.
We actually have clinical practice updates. Is there anything that you do, because you're obviously over east, are you?
Yeah. So
do you come over very often?
Do I have what?
Do you come over very often?
We're coming more and more.
All right.
So one of the exciting things I haven't mentioned yet is that we haven't opened it up to the public, but we've just come up with a diagnostic profile called the Youth Voice and Perspectives Profile, which actually is a process that we go through in looking and asking the youth from their perspective to answer questions related to the reimbursements so that we can get their opinion and literally their perspective. We generally ask two caring individuals who are also involved in that child's life just to provide some other information. It could be a tool that would be helpful for you in the sense that it comes up with identified strengths and needs for that particular reimbursement area. And so if that's something that would be helpful to you, you can go onto our website, and we do have some prerequisites and some requests and requirements to access it, but there is no charge for it. But that's at thepersonbrain.com. So, yeah.
That was my next question was, Shane, you're here, but I think you're north, yeah? Are you north?
No, Perth.
Yeah, but north, not south. Joondalup.
Also, our office is based in the city,
yeah.
so we...
All right.
Yep.
For our families are quite low socioeconomic. It's costs of services and how to access. Can you share how that can be done?
Yeah, absolutely. So depending if the clients are connected to a not-for-profit or another organisation, they can reach out, and we're happy to negotiate whatever's going to work for that family. So we're happy to do that 100%. And we do as a social enterprise, so any of the partners that we connect with, and we do support a number of young people and families at no cost from a social enterprise perspective from our partners too. So.
Over to you, Taku.
Okay, we've got a lovely lady here.
Hi, my name's Mcbride. I work for WA Health in a program called the SPOC Unit, Statewide Protection of Children Coordination Unit. I'm a senior policy officer, and I also run training in metro areas and all around the state. One of the things that I'm interested in is we go to a lot of environments where you have whole communities that are traumatised, and you could also argue there was intergenerational trauma. And so what you have is environments, and it doesn't have to be a small community, it often is, where you have traumatised children, traumatised parents, traumatised grandparents, traumatised staff. The whole environment, you've got people really working hard to try and do the right thing, but it just doesn't seem like there's an infrastructure that can support that without really significant input and resources. And I'm just wondering, possibly from Howard or Paul, from anyone really, what information you do or don't have about that, or anywhere to point us in relation to resources or information. Thank you.
I'm very well aware of what you're saying, and some of the work that I've done in Canada with the First Nations groups have resonated very similarly to what's happening, and that the trauma is impacting everyone. And so I think you have to start looking at the people that are caring in the first direction and seeing how we can help them and recognizing what's happening. I think that's our first step, because it's beyond self-care. It's in self-recognition of where your triggers might be. So for example, if we asked earlier if there's something that might trigger you and that's uncomfortable, we gave permission to be able to take some time and to look at that. But I think you have to scan, and maybe even looking at reimbursement needs in staff and looking at that, and communities, and where are your priorities to first begin the process. But it will not be just looking at one particular segment of that group. It will take a community. We've had an interesting involvement about 10 years ago in one community where there was a principal who was quite enterprising, and they had a logging industry that shut down, which basically shut the whole town down, and no one had employment. And it really became a major thing, but he was instrumental in bringing a particular training up to the whole community. So all the hospital staff, the school staff, the police staff in this town of 3,000 people were trained to support one another. And it took years, but they didn't stop when people weren't being fixed in 2 months. They kept going. And they realized this is a long journey. We're not going to see the results maybe tomorrow, next week, next month, and 6 months. But if we stay focused, we will start chipping away at some of our problems, and we'll start seeing things to get better. One of the things I would say in that is that we tend to give up too quickly. And we think that we need to do something else when we need to keep doing more of what we're doing. And if we don't see fast enough results, it's why one of the mantras I will say, we're not here to cure. If that happens, that's amazing. But very rarely do we see that. But we are here in the business of making things get better. And we need to figure out how we can track that so that we can show people that. Howard mentioned earlier he likes to see things in a visual scale. I do too. I like to know where we're going and where we're making progress. And if we're not, we need to do something differently right now. Not tomorrow, but today. And then we need to keep doing the same pathway if we're moving forward too. So that's not an easy fix. I know you know that already. But there needs to be a starting point, and first it has to start with a recognition that everyone needs to participate.
Might just add to that too, like I talked about that concept of a framework or something leading. So my first question back would be, do people know what they want for the community or for the people that you're serving? Now, for us in New South Wales, that started with a conversation with facts, with everyone sitting around a table looking at, so just to use an example, residential care, and this concept of trauma and where does that fit within our sector. And what was pretty much come up with is that there was 16 guiding principles that were sort of developed that they said, and it's not everything, but certainly people sat around the table from all parts of the sector and agreed that these are some of the principles that need to be then embedded within our system. How you actually achieve those things is then up to the individual organisations to then say, okay, well, this is how we want to do it. But what it gave them was a framework or a thinking to say, okay, that's where we're going. And that's what Paul's saying, I guess, that map. Like, you don't go on holidays without mapping out where you're going. It's that concept that you really need to start with, okay, this is what we're about. And it won't be everything. Same as the Circle of Courage when we found that it's not everything, but it was really good. And what it did was actually got us to a stage where we're doing good stuff. And then it built from there into our needs-based framework. So I think there's a starting point, and I think that starting point's found with the people that you're working with versus just trying to get technical or trying to pull it from somewhere, from a book or something else. It's about working with the ground level and saying, okay, what do we want to do and how do we do it? Here's all the theories and talking about that, and then actually come up with a committed front, I guess, about whether it's principles, a whole range of things about how you're going to bite into it.
Thanks. I think that's really interesting and intuitively, I think a lot of us know that. So I work for the government, I work for the health department, and I think, from all stratas of management and whatever, they would acknowledge that, we're also having to support whatever political party is in power at the time. We don't have the 10-year plans that Cheryl talked about, and so having that longevity and that commitment to something that isn't, it's a year on and you've been doing it, so how come it's not sorted yet? I think as a dialogue, as communities, we need to be prepared to think about at a political level how those decisions are made to make those supports.
I can add something on that as well. From one of the stages in the Insane Factor, it's called the lyric sheet. And the reason why it's called the lyric sheet, I know when I'm sitting in Faith on a Sunday and we're all singing the same song, something happens, and I connect that to the word alignment. So one of the stages in the Insane Factor is with the engage stage, we do not move forward until everyone is aligned on where this case is going. And I think that's something that you can probably take some note on, where the alignment is out. And there's 5 key points that we look at. There's time, there's decision-making process, there's what are some of the resources that we can use. I can't remember quite the other ones. But without alignment, without everyone being aligned on what's happening for that young person, especially from a team perspective, you're not going to be able to move forward.
Thank you, guys.
Sorry, can I just make a quick... Sorry.
Go ahead.
Am I talking?
I'm up the back here.
Oh, at the back. Okay.
I'm very
just
sneaky.
a really quick comment. I think many of us are aware of some of those communities and areas, and it can be very overwhelming to be involved in that. I've always had the sense, say someone something like the framework of the trauma-based care framework, that we're never going to be able to sit back and get the whole community enthused with this or moving on this before we do something. Every one of us, of course, has a role, don't we? In terms, if we're administrators, if we're clinicians, if we're caseworkers or direct care workers, we translate those concepts in the way we can. The youth justice facility. I'm working with a couple now where in youth justice services they're looking at, well, what does this mean for us? How can we change our practice in that? So it's not the entire community, but it's critical parts of the service domain where real change can occur. And I just say this, I've been intrigued across Australia, especially the remote parts, that sometimes when the community comes together, you do see dramatic change. And I'm thinking, for instance, of some communities that I'm aware of in the Northern Territory, for instance, where there's been dramatic change in things like the well-being of children, as measured by the AEDC and things like that, that it does come together in some of these communities in a very dramatic sort of way.
I guess it's a shame that Cheryl isn't here to respond to your question, because I think certainly from her presentation this morning and talking about the need for culturally secure approaches, with particularly with Aboriginal communities, and I think there's been a lot of work done on cultural healing, with Aboriginal communities and organisations. So I guess. My sense with that is that, the trauma-informed models and that we've been talking about today are important, have a role, but in terms of dealing with what you're talking about, I think that needs to be combined with working with people, from Aboriginal organisations, etc., to get responses that are going to be culturally secure in terms of the communities that you're dealing with. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to keep moving things along. We've got a person up the back here.
Hello, I'm Jess. I am a caseworker with Uniting Care West. My question is to do with when there's been a breakdown in a relationship between a carer and a young person, specifically a team. What are the ways that you can open both up to rebuild that trust in that relationship when they've both shut down from it?
Did everyone hear that all right?
Kind of, not really.
Did you want to repeat it, or you would like me to paraphrase? So you're asking what happens between a breakdown between a carer and a young person, and how to rebuild that? Any particular person, or to all? To all.
My experience has been the starting point for that is acceptance on both sides. I've been a child within a family that does foster care and then become foster care as well as part of our program, and then now we manage many foster care placements, and the biggest struggle is getting our caseworkers to understand that they're real people and they're real relationships and they're in their home, and so I think that acceptance and training for your staff around understanding how to dance that dance and to be with the kids and the carers is really important. So the training that is filled with knowledge and not sort of stuff that's going to make them feel denigrated in their role or what they do is really, really important. So I think it's very important that an ongoing relationship allows you to get in there, because it's inevitable it's going to happen, because that's what happens with relationships. So to me, it's not about trying to prevent that from happening, because that's a part of the journey. It's about when it happens, how do you do it? So to me, it's about your staff. who the staff are, depending on your model and what that looks like. It's about getting them and making sure that they can get in there and use the tools that they've learned to actually understand to be with. So part of Paul's training, and that is about being with kids and being with carers. I say everything I've learnt now about kids, I apply the same principles to staff. And if that's not applied, you're sort of, you're at a back step, because we're all human. If you look at the ACEs, many of the people in our room, in the room have got high ACEs scores, I'm sure. So the same stuff needs to be applied. So I think that starting from a place of acceptance, that those sort of things, and it's through that journey that you start with carers and telling them that this is going to happen. It's that walking with versus, So I think if someone was to sit here and tell you it's not going to happen, of course it's going to happen. Paul shared with his journey some of those things that he'd happened through that journey, but what happened when those things happen? And I think that's the most important bit. It's about preparing caseworkers and people for that and how to respond appropriately.
If we just refer back to one thing I would say, and I give people a roadmap if they've participated in some of our training, I would say take a look at the concepts of safety and significance and respect and related, and I would then ask you, where are those aspects breaking down? So I would say, where are you not feeling safe, and trying to find what we would call a commonality, and how can we meet at some point where we're both feeling safe, and then we begin to make that healing process there. But also you have to keep in mind that a lot of these breakdowns occur because people are not feeling significant, meaning that the people who are working with the individuals that are challenging don't feel that they have the skills at hand to do their job, and as a result, they leave these kids or these individuals untouched, if you will, in the sense that they're afraid of them and don't move forward. So we start to have to really examine those things. So where are you not feeling significant in your job? Where are you not feeling significant living in this home? Where are you not feeling respected? And we have to keep that in mind. It's a significant thing, or it's an important thing, as well as that when people are not feeling respected, that's actually a threatening thing. If you say something to me that's disrespectful, I start to think you might be a threat to me. So we have to start breaking those things down. When people are saying this child has come into my house and all they do is disrespect me, I want to start finding out what that carer or what that residential youth worker values and respect, because that becomes what we will call in our training a secure commonality, if that makes sense.
Okay.
One of the things talking about acceptance, I really love that. When I was listening to Simon's talk about acceptance, what can you accept? And I think an interesting thing is actually understanding that there is a breakdown. When I heard you say that, I thought about washing dishes. And I thought that's something that I definitely don't like to do. And when you need to clean up the dishes, and I'm using that analogy, you need to realise there's a big pile of load that you need to do. And I think a lot of people, when you don't realise you're in a breakdown, keep operating on top of that breakdown. So one of the first things I think is actually understand and get, well, we're actually in a breakdown now. Personal example I thought when I heard you share was two young people arguing, and I had good rapport with both of them. I'm like, girls, cut it out. And I called them girls, and they both turned on me, and then the argument started towards me, and then I had to clean up the mess that I'd made. And I don't know about you, but I hate doing dishes. So I think understanding that, there is a breakdown there and dealing with that first.
We've got a question from this corner of the room. All right.
Hi, my name's Karina Chakoti. I work for Save the Children and lead the Youth Partnership Project. Terry, this is probably a bit of a question for you. I think one of the challenges that we face is that we have universities that produce people like health workers, youth workers, etc., who come out full of understanding of trauma, come out full of empathy for people, and then they walk into systems that aren't built on empathy, that aren't actually centering people at the middle of those. So my question is, how do we embed this trauma-informed understanding and empathy at our systems within our country, in our state?
Ooh. Yeah, look, I guess, in terms of what you're really talking about is a culture, isn't it, within organisations, and going back to the stuff that that my presentation was about, and really a lot of what's been said by other speakers today, that you're talking about respect, inclusiveness, and and I guess acknowledging the roles that different people have to play in organisations, look, I guess a lot of that comes from the leadership of organisations, and I think the important aspect is really getting that culture there, where there is that respect for the range of disciplines, but also the commitment to, even though we've got political masters, political imperatives, government organisations have often huge pressures externally upon those who are leading them, but at the end of the day, it's what they're doing is about people, and you can't make changes that are significant in people's worlds if you do it without them, and so it's getting that, I guess, that philosophy imbued, and some of it is training of managers and leaders too, that whatever knowledge they may have, whatever insights and wisdom they have, that there's a whole lot of people that have got to be brought along with them if they're going to achieve success. And that's the important thing, that if they're... one of the things you learn when you're in senior positions in organisations is that whilst in some respects you have a lot of power, in other respects you have almost none. Because in terms of everything that has to happen to put into place the stuff that you may be leading and directing, it's other people who are going to do it for you. So really, unless the organisation's culture is about inclusiveness and respect and respectful engagement with those other people who at the end of the day are going to make you succeed or fail, then all likelihood is you will fail. So, there's some self-preservation for leaders of organisations in that too. I don't know how well that's answered your question, but...
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that, on the panel?
Yeah. Can I just make a quick comment, just a comment on that? And I think what you're alluding to, I think, is a really major tension for people who feel enthusiastic about the trauma framework, that they often work in organisations that don't share that enthusiasm. And Sandra Bloom explores this issue quite well. So if you're interested in her work, Bloom and Farragher's work on Restoring Sanctuary is their recent one. But she talks about that as being the issue of moral safety, that staff can sometimes be put in the situation where they believe things should be done, support should be offered because of the needs of the clients, but the organisations are not supporting them to be able to do that, and they feel this tension. Now, I'm not suggesting any neat solution to that, but if it's owned, it's named in organisations, it's easier to deal with. And she talks about processes in organisations to deal with this issue of moral safety.
I think that's great, and I think particularly in the not-for-profit sector, we haven't arrived, but we're definitely on our way. I think I'm more talking about our government systems and how we're leading as a country in doing that, and thinking about examples like New Zealand. If you read some of their child protection policies, it sounds like it could have been written by someone like you. Very well grounded in the people that they're there to serve. And so I guess I'm just looking at how do we do that as a country and get better at that and embedding it within our wider systems, not just our organisations.
So a couple of things. I think that contracts need to be written in a way that allows for innovation with services. Hence the idea of the principles. So you come up with principles, and then agencies can then just kick ass in regards to what they do well. And that's just being brutally honest. Part of my job, I can't stand, but the reality is I try and keep up a big fence that surrounds us, because I don't want other people to be, and my glass is generally a really full glass. Okay, so I'm in the right place to do what I'm doing because I can take a lot of knocks, because there's a lot of crap within that space, but there's a good reason why that's there as well. So I try really hard from an agency perspective to keep a big fence up and just not even let people know until they need to know what's coming, because half the stuff doesn't come out, as you know, and you spend a lot of times in meetings and going along to things. And so I think that agencies the people on the front line need to be able to do the stuff that matters and do it well. The other thing is, I think, come from the bottom up versus the top down, because the top down is very long. Bottom up, what I would say is that do it differently. And, you know, if you're a new person going into the field, or, you know, that kind of aspect is that no person, CEO or anyone, wants to actually ignore stuff that's working well. So if people do stuff that's good and you stay silent and you just do good practice, generally you're going to have a huge influence on those around you. So I think that's the other thing to think of. Sometimes we're trying to come from this kind of room down. The answer's on the ground in regards to the people doing it. So I think new starters and people are the most important people in my books. It's like the book, The Other 23 Hours. It's the real stuff that happens. So it's as much as in an organisation that you can embed that, then I think you'll go a long way.
So borrowing Simon's terminology, has anyone else got a kick-ass question? Yep, up the back again.
Hi, my name's Carolyn Aylmore. I work for Department of Communities, Family and Children Support in our Learning Development branch. My question's probably to Terry, but it's also building on some of the questions that have been asked previously. Just during the design phase of projects being put together, how readily can plans or the project scope actually be altered in a bureaucratic structure? Seems once the wheels are set in motion, it seems to me that it's difficult because the political agenda that's driving a particular project often dictates what happens. So probably in my experience, where there's a great pilot, everything starts out as a pilot project, and even if it is working well, it's often sort of brought to a close because funding's no longer available, or like Best Beginnings, I guess, is probably an example of a home visiting service that sort of seems to be driven by KPIs and not the people that are actually receiving the services. So my question is, how easily can you change that, Terry, when you're working in a bureaucratic structure?
Look, I guess it depends on the extent to which that structure is committed to being flexible and to being a learning organisation. And learning organisations aren't just about going off to courses. Learning organisations are about picking up on the new information as you're going and being sufficiently flexible to adjust course so that you achieve the best results. So is it possible? I think of course it's possible, but it depends on the nature of the organisation and really their commitment to learning, flexibility, to taking on board not only pre-existing evidence but new evidence as it emerges, and using that to fine-tune whatever it is that you're doing. So possible, absolutely, but a lot of that depends upon the culture of the organisation. I guess one thing I'd say, you've mentioned a word that always gets reaction from me, and that's pilots. The business of funding a pilot and nothing else is really a fraudulent way of resourcing services that you should. My belief is the government should only fund, or an organisation should only fund a pilot if there's a commitment to learn from that pilot and expand beyond it if it proves to be successful. But so often we see the pilot is all that there was ever money in the bank for, which in most cases means it should never have been begun in the first place.
Did you want to enhance on your question?
I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't really so much in relation to my current role within learning and development. It was more around, the early intervention preventative services, which we know work. Yeah. That I've been a home visitor in the past, and Best Beginnings, those sorts of services, they just sort of they have really positive outcomes, but because a government change, then all of a sudden that new government doesn't see merit in it and they want to be doing something new, so that kind of gets wound up and so anyway, I just wanted to clarify.
Look, I guess a short answer to that is probably that democracy has its flaws, but it's far better than any of the alternatives.
We've got a question from the front here.
Jenny Allen, Nagala, Midwestern Gascoyne, so very passionate about regional and remote areas, and really going back, I guess, to the very first question and the systems question. I do agree with you about bottom-up processes, and I think, yes, the NGO sector tries to work really well like that, but I also think we have to consider top-down, and so wondering about some comments around this. And my example is with, for example, an education department, where in regional areas, often school principals might have very limited understanding or knowledge, not necessarily about a passion or an enthusiasm for this, but they actually don't know it. And they're actually really caught up in NAPLAN, standardised testing, sight words for pre-primary children. And so then that filters to teachers who are often not very experienced and very high turnover. So you might have, some of our schools have 50% turnover every year. So building from the bottom up, trying to create a community that understands that is a real challenge. So please answer how we deal with that.
Can I make one brief comment before I pass the mic? I think the term top-down is one that I have difficulty with. I think if you really want to get people to work with you, then it's got to be top alongside, not top-down.
Look, that sort of got me excited what you were talking there. I'm thinking, oh, wow, what could we do? Look, I guess the thing is that the teacher a part of the culture is at the school and the community. So you could flip it a little bit and actually drive it from that side of things. So when a teacher comes in, given they've got high turnover, they know what they're in for. So it's not the other way around where the teachers set the actual culture of the school. That's just one sort of thought around that. Outside of that, I think that is something that I can't answer completely. We're not in the most remote. We service places that have no services to things like psychiatrists and all those kind of things, and we're coming up with some really alternative ways of trying to deliver training and all those kind of things, whether that be through Skype, a whole lot of things. One of the things for the diploma program, like I mentioned before, was that I'd met all these wonderful people all over the world. I wanted to bring that to them, so I then sent out a message to people I knew and said, can you actually do some film clips? And I want these film clips to actually be things like, what's the most important things for child and youth care? Gave them these ideas and concepts that I wanted them to build on, and they actually did these clips that blew me away. I didn't know what was coming. And next minute, my staff are getting stuff from Canada and from wherever and they were going, they got the same crap going on over there as we do. So again, remote Australia, remote areas, all I can offer in that part of that conversation is trying to think of the think outside the box ideas, which is see if you can actually drag in some concepts of champions and people you meet, because you're a champion, you're here and you get to see and how do you then use these people to then drag back, because I think sometimes people want to offer more than what's there. So that's just from what I can add. So, and I think definitely you're right. We definitely do need though both sides of the fence.
So I guess I was really lucky over the last 7 years working at Department of Ed, head office, and for statewide services as well. We were lucky practicing my model and doing that. And I've got to take a stand for the social entrepreneurs and the people with the innovative ideas to follow on with Simon. You've got to give that space for the creatives to create something new. And I think that's why things are shifting, I guess, with the practice that I'm offering, is being able to do that. And I think sometimes there's the frameworks that don't allow us. And I think you were saying we need to get really innovative and bring in the new upcoming entrepreneurs who are coming up with innovative ideas that policies and procedures aren't constricting on how we can take young people to certain opportunities.
Thanks, guys. Just looking at the time and aware, we've probably got time for about 2 more questions. So one more person from this side. Yeah. Getting my exercise today.
While they're finding that, I'll just also make a comment that I think it's really important that everything's contextualised, and I think that came up today. We didn't need someone to plonk a model within Newcastle where we were and all that kind of stuff. It was something that was built, but you draw from other things. So I think you need to also protect that for those places that you're talking about that are working. They need to build that from the knowledge and those things, not try and take a model and plonk it in, because my experience has been that doesn't work very effective either.
Sorry. My name's Danielle Pendrell. I work for the Department of Communities from the housing branch, but looking to get more kind of integrated strategies and policies across our new major department, which is quite challenging, as you can probably imagine. Thank you so much for your presentations today. And please forgive my ignorance, but in particular, I wanted to ask Mr. Bath where we could look for more information in relation to how to assist people with trauma to have adaptive coping strategies. Unfortunately, it was very quickly covered in the last of your presentation.
Yeah, I hardly covered it at all, actually. I can just suggest that there are many. There are many publications out there, a growing number of publications on this. There's a whole lot of stuff, for instance, on how to apply mindfulness strategies in schools, in residential programs, and some of them are very, very helpful with just useful, engaging exercises that children and young people can participate in. There's a whole lot of material in, for instance, Van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, where he talks about a lot of new approaches to working with people who are struggling with trauma-based symptoms, for instance, body-based responses, theatre, joint rhythmic activities. There's a whole lot of physical activities that are how can I say, at this stage, there's not a lot of research on it, but there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of enthusiasm about those sort of approaches. I can also draw your attention to people like Sandra Bloom's work and Farragher, and there's 3 volumes there that are packed full of useful ideas. So that's just for a start. Siegel's work also has quite a lot of useful stuff, and in particular, a very good writer, Cozzolino, who I mentioned once this morning. Louis Cozzolino.
Okay, to move on, I'll hand it back to Joseph.
I'm Joseph Wallum Noongar fella. I work for a thing called the Office Inspector Custodial Services, and these are my 2 colleagues here. I just wanted to ask make an observation first. You fellas up there talking, answering our questions here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you blokes. I'm going to just be negative for a minute. You all sound positive. You all sound wicked. You all sound solid. But do you have a too hard basket? Because it sounds like you can solve everything. But do you actually have, like a moment of negativity or something like that, you 4? And last one is, you in the middle there, bro. You still got that black car?
Oh, that is gold. I was like, where is this going? I was like, you're in the middle. I was like, oh, no. No, I don't. But I do have a nice
I'm going to get a ride home with you. Now, and just to make a, I'm looking for something here. Just to make an observation this day, and just cultural. Because I've gone through a few emotions here, and it's about trauma, I'm going to just suggest culturally on you fellas, Mr. Yakwa, that perhaps next time, don't so much give strong consideration to a Noongar welcome, because I think in this today I saw the acknowledgements of, every time you made a speech. But perhaps because it's about trauma, find a way to have an happy ending, and perhaps ask an Aboriginal person next time, what's a good way to say goodbye such after a tough, long day? That's all.
Wow, thank you. I just want to personally acknowledge you for giving me that. Personally, for me, and I'm just going to be authentic here, I actually heard everyone acknowledge the Aboriginal people, and I actually said to Joel, and I'm just being authentic, I was like, man, I've never done, this is my first time speaking in front of a large crowd, and I said, do I need to do one, do I not? So thank you so much for that. I personally acknowledge you for being upfront and authentic with us all, and I'm going to take that on board and speak to you after and maybe chat about how that could look like and what I could do to make sure that I'm communicating more effectively. Thank you. I wish I did have that black card too. Now, I wasn't quite clear on what the too hard basket meant for like where you were going in the context, but from what I heard, definitely for me, as a youth worker and now a qualified counsellor, from a youth-based perspective, I'm not I don't have a full qualification in psychology or anything like that. I think that's something that all youth workers need to be mindful of, is what case can I touch that's actually out of my zone. And I think starting private practice, that's something that I need to be really mindful of. And as a professional, go, hey, look, that's going to be something that's out of my field. I'm not going to be able to support that, both culturally, psychologically. So that's for me. And I struggle. Look, me talking right now, I know I'm really confident in I talk, but something in the back of my head, I'm like, man, why is that guy looking at me like that? Did I say this too fast? Did I not say this good enough? So yeah, absolutely. Too hard basket for me comes up all the time, and I think being reflective on what's going to work and what works for me and what doesn't. So thanks. Too hard basket, mate. Sorry.
You got him, Joseph. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that before we move on?
I guess in the area that we all work in, or at least for me, most of it is past tense now, but everything could be too hard if we let it be. And I think what characterises people who work in this area generally is that you have an absolute passion to make the too hard doable. And I think everybody in this industry needs to be applauded for that. So thank you, all of you.
Just before I hand back to Taku, I will ask this last question from a regional area because I think it's very on topic, and I'd also like to acknowledge Cheryl and also Auntie Liz in this sort of sense. So this is from Juvenile Justice in Halls Creek. How can trauma-informed practices by non-Indigenous people encourage and mutually support traditional healing approaches? I thought it was a really good one to ask. I don't know if we have an answer. Can you repeat that,
Joel?
So how can trauma-informed practices by non-Indigenous people encourage and mutually support traditional healing approaches?
I can only just share from a case. So when you give, I guess the work that I'm doing is we ask young people what their vision is, and we get to draw it out. And ask this young fella, if you could have absolutely anything, what would you want? And he goes, man, I want a troopy. And I was like, what the hell is a troopy? And he says, it's a car with 12 seats. And I said, why is that so important? Because I can leave school with 12 seats and go camping and fishing and cooking and be out in country. Now, the thing is, I didn't understand any of that. How do we communicate that back to the school? And I guess that was one of the key aspects. I had to try and understand and explain why and what that troopy meant to that young person. And I don't know if I'm answering the question as best I can, but I'm looking at how can I contribute to this it was for me to understand what was important to that young person. So I think if we kind of go from there and understand what's really important to our Aboriginal youth, and we can understand from their perspective, not our own.
I think sometimes this is related to Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people. I think sometimes the best thing we can do is facilitate things to happen versus actually think we've got the answers. So for us, we're a non-designated Aboriginal service, but sadly we have a number of kids in our care that are Aboriginal. It's not what we want because our Aboriginal people tell us that should not be happening as well. So for us, it's about relationship. We stopped trying to solve the problem of everything, but to actually walk alongside a local Aboriginal agency who actually guide us in all of our practices. And to be honest, we just sit and listen is our number one thing. And the next thing is to facilitate. One of the programs and families you've seen in the video there recently, we were way out of our depth in many cases culturally and understanding how to work with some of the families that we're being asked to work with. And some of those Aboriginal services are asking us to help them. So for us, it was about engaging the elders locally for us and sitting and being with them. So it was about facilitating a place, some thinking, really a framework, safety, all the key things that you heard in this concept that's meant to be really out there around trauma, but it's really basic when it comes down to those basic principles. So for us, it's really about facilitating there's a lot of experts out there, and it's about finding those experts and asking them to help and being a part of that journey, I guess, would be our experience. So don't assume to know the answers, but assume to help, because if not, then you're not helpful at things to stay stagnant.
Can I just make one quick comment about that? I wouldn't presume to know the answer to that question, or how we integrate, or how traditional healing practices can be integrated, except to just acknowledge that it is being done, and it is being done very effectively by certain people and certain organisations. And I draw your attention, of course, to the Healing Foundation that's associated, of course, with the Bringing Them Home report, where there is a lot of emphasis on how to translate these concepts of trauma that are meaningful in terms of people from other cultures, and particularly integrating more traditional ways of healing as part of that process. So there is a lot of work going on in that space.
I was actually going to say, I'd be really curious to hear what you thought in response to that question. Is it Uncle Joseph? Yeah, well, yeah. Would you like the mic? I guess only because we don't have Dr. Scholl here to answer, but maybe you might have insight that you want to add quickly before we end the day in response to how non-Indigenous people can help with,
Look, I absolutely, but I'm going to just answer that from the court. That's the Noongar for art, and I'm going to answer it in the Noongar Nation way, and really just a Joseph way, in that I'm going to answer the question this way. You need to include us in that, because we want to. I was 16 once, but I never had a black car. I was taken from my mum. So I don't know if I wanted to talk about that at 18. I wanted to play footy and do other things and be angry and drink. So to answer the question, yeah, you need to engage us, and we want to engage us. And I'm a classic example of that as a Noongar man. There are some things I want to stop. And those two things I want to stop in my community is violence and drinking. Well, drugging now. So there, and what do I say that is? Because it's a transitional thing, it's a morphing thing. Like I said, I'm now the other side of 55, and I want to act like that. And I want to ensure that my kids, my Noongar kids, in Sliding Care, don't suffer the same kind of things I do and have better outcomes than what I have, and don't wait till you turn 50 plus to stop being angry. So yes, you have to engage us, and I'm only talking from a Noongar perspective in Noongar country, and I get the traditional, absolutely the healing aspects. And I say Noongar because I'm very mindful that I come from a demographic of cultures very differently. You've got Wongai, Noongar, Yamaji, and such like that. So I'm just speaking Noongar. You had a Noongar woman speak this morning, academic, Cheryl Tucker. Then you've had a Noongar woman speak, auntie, elder, who wants to be a social worker, and she's doing a PhD in it, which is going to make her a doctor. But don't forget the uncles. Don't forget the hunter. Don't forget the storyteller. Don't forget the weaver. That's the woman who tells the stories. So you do have opportunity to do healing, and let's not academicize it. Just keep it social, keep it community, keep it uncle, keep it Auntie Liz, keep it Cheryl, keep it Joseph. But Joseph, like I said, I'm a hunter, I'm a toolmaker, I'm a storyteller. But more importantly, what I want to be right now, because I think my white hair and my seniority gives me that, is a healer. And to be a healer, sometimes you have to be a straight talker, and you really have to have people around you to support it. And Allambi, I like the sound of that big fella. And your enthusiasm is contagious. And I was watching your video, big fella, and I didn't like it until I saw that Aboriginal family. You know, I was waiting for it. I said, where the Noongars? Where the Noongars? Sorry. Where's the black fella? Where's the black fella? So, to answer that question, or to talk about that question, it's an ongoing one, and it can be done, Mr. Simpson. You know, it can be done. It's not done enough in environments of incarceration. And maybe it shouldn't be if I'm talking as a Noongar bloke, but it can be done in care. And it should be. Because I think you're worth money, Liz. Those who want to take care of our kids who are traumatised, we want to work with you. You know? I don't know if I want to go abseiling down a cliff, but I'll take you I'll take you hunting because that's my culture. And I'm sure my son or my grandson or my grandchildren want to go abseiling or Shazam it or whatever it is. Things like that, you know? So to answer the question, I'm answering in the cultural and the social way and the Noongar man way. Yeah, there is things, and that's the challenge. That's the challenge. That's your two-hard basket. It's how do you bring that cultural healing into it, okay? And it's not new, you fellas. In our community, people are doing it for years. But, you know, going hunting after grieving is wicked. You know, Auntie Liz talked earlier about grieving yesterday. I was part of that grieving yesterday at Northern. But let me tell you what most of us are doing tomorrow. While Cheryl's playing basketball with her kids, some of us are going hunting and eating that in the bush. So, you know, the question I think is answered in some way too. It is occurring. You just need to embrace it. And I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. We're out of time, so I will hand back over to our host, Taku. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Joel and to our speakers. If you'd like to give them a round of applause. Thank you.